Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of Attack IQ's podcast, Think Bad, Do Good. And it is my great pleasure to host an investor, a leader, and a cybersecurity strategist, Marcus Bartram. Did I say it right that time? Yeah, he gives me the thumbs up. Good. Thank you, Marcus. Who is one of Attack IQ's lead investors, and he comes to us from Telstra Ventures. But Marcus, where are you based today? What's the weather like? What's happening up there?
Hey, Jonathan. Really great to be here. I'm in sunny Mill Valley. It feels like it's nice and warm outside. I haven't ventured outside today, but after this, I'm going to go for a walk.
Oh, good. Well, hopefully you won't need a walk after today's podcast. Thank you, Marcus, for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you. And why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and like where you came from and how you came into this space?
Sure. So, in venture capital in particular, I was working at Telstra, which is an Australian telecoms company, in 2010, working for an executive there who had a vision for how do we drive innovation in a big giant telecommunications company.
Hmm.
And I was part of a small team that sort of came up with the idea of, how do we attract the attention of these amazing entrepreneurs and founders that are innovating in the world and get them to work with Telstra. And we kind of landed on two things. What do founders want? They need capital and they want customers. And they need expertise, and Telstra can offer them capital and customers. So this sort of idea evolved and twisted and turned and ultimately became Telstra Ventures.
Yep.
We made our first investment in early 2012, and have sort of gone on to greater and bigger things since then.
That's
So
awesome.
now we're invested in sort of 90 companies across a really broad spectrum of the software, cyber, and tech industry.
Yeah, I know. When did you first touch cybersecurity? Was it when you were in London with NSC? Is that right?
Yeah, that was in just in the dot-com boom with a company called NSC, NSC Global. We had a practice. We were selling managed services and security services and security consulting services, and we were selling like the early versions of Checkpoint Firewall and Net Forensics as a intrusion detection tool. And that's when my first exposure to cyber came from.
Hmm. And what was it like in London back then? Give us some flavor for the environment when you first got into cyber.
London in the dot-com boom was crazy. It was so much fun. It,
Hmm.
it felt like you could do anything. Um, there were people, it was actually, there's a level of madness associated with it, but, people had real imagination for the things they were trying to create and build. Um, which, I was sitting in the kind of tech side of that industry at that point, rather than the financing side of the industry, but where I am now. But it felt like there's tons and tons of opportunity,
Hmm.
and thousands of companies got created, and entrepreneurs went out and raised capital and did all sorts of wonderful things. And no, the story of the dot-com boom is and the dot-com bust is well told, but I lived through both of those, which is a really fascinating moment to be in an early stage company
Yeah.
um, on both sides of it.
Hmm. No, I think American listeners in particular think about the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust, and they think about sort of billionaires and millionaires made in Silicon Valley, but you're in London. And
Yeah.
what were some of your like formative memories of that time? And tell us what you did after NSC too, because I think that will inspire envy on the part of our listeners.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. So, like the best, I mean, the hardest thing to do in that time was to find talent
Hmm.
because everyone was running at a million miles an hour, and talent was really expensive, and so you had to hire. You could hire people, but you were paying like premium rates for the talent.
Hmm.
Um, And then when the dot-com bust came, there's like huge restructures of these companies because customers just stopped buying. They all retracted. I remember sitting in the office in London, and it was literally the space of 2 days. We went from selling to not selling, and by the end of the week, we had an office that seated maybe 20 people, and we had 80 people back in the office, sitting on the floor and hanging around in the corridors, and clearly, things had shifted incredibly dramatically. So, we went through this really painful process and a real learning sort of process for me, where we had to let like a huge part of that workforce go, try and reset the company, and get it back to some level of sustainability and kind of build out of that. Yeah, and for my personally, that was a really hard time, and required an enormous amount of work, both building the company and then, kind of rebuilding the company, along with the founders and other folks there. And I found myself sort of saying, look, the company doesn't need someone like me in it. Like, it goes back to a reset. So, I left, and I was really fortunate. I actually had an offer to do a Master's of Business or an MBA at Oxford University. So I took 6 weeks off, I think it was, and I literally just lay down in the grass. I was so tired.
Yeah.
Lay down in the grass in the sun and just tried to recover, and then went off to Oxford University and did the MBA, which was an amazing experience.
What role did Oxford play in your career, if you were to think about it? I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but the Saïd School of Business is such a cool place. And as someone who spent, I've been to Oxford probably a grand total of 10 days in my life. Each time it was like a short visit. I had some friends who went there. I was extremely envious. They didn't seem to be working very hard, which is like not what I was expecting. These were like people who either didn't get the Rhodes Scholarship or got something close to it, and I was expecting them to be studious and like making magic. So what was it like at Oxford then, and how did that shape your career?
It's just like Hogwarts, Jonathan. It was amazing. So I would say like, a couple of things. So I kind of went into Oxford, and I actually had an offer before I joined NSC to go and do an MBA. And I spoke to a mentor. He was actually my father-in-law, and I said, what do you think I should do? And he said, go and do the early stage, go and do the startup, the early stage company, because you'll learn more doing that than you will doing an MBA. And at the end of that, and I then accepted to go into the MBA, I kind of knew the things I didn't know through the startup and the things that I wanted to learn, which are really kind of numerate things like finance and accounting and marketing, all these sort of subjects that you sort of do in a startup, but it's just such a crazy environment. You kind of don't know what you don't know. So I went to the MBA to kind of fill all the gaps, or the perceived gaps that I had. And through that, and through the MBA, I kind of really enjoyed the sort of heavier finance subjects around, private equity and just a touch on private and venture capital, and kind of filled in all the dot points that I need to fill in on these other subjects. And so when I popped out of it, that's sort of the place I wanted to go. But, the journey from there to actually doing it was still, a decade away, after the MBA.
What was it about venture capital that attracted you to that field?
It's kind of the idea of building businesses, and the idea of capital as a tool to sort of be in that process. So years before I worked at Honeywell, I was an engineer. I trained as an engineer. I went to Honeywell, and really enjoyed the role I had there, which was helping kind of build a business, not really being an engineer,
Hmm.
but running a small team and trying to build a product and get it sold and win customers and respond to tenders and do all these things, and build a marketing program. And then going to the startup was exactly the same thing. It's like, how do you kind of survive as a small company in this sort of crazy environment? And we had business all over Europe and all through the UK. Really impressive clients, and it was generally it was a lot of fun. And so this idea of building a business was the thing that kind of resonated. And then the finance side of it, I just kind of liked the finance element of it and trying to understand what that meant and how it worked and what the point of it was.
Yeah. So I'm tempted, like, you've now been an investor for X period of time, right? Like, I think at least 15
Well,
years, right?
we've,
Uh,
we had our 10th anniversary from our first investment in you know 8 weeks ago, 12 weeks
great.
ago.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you think about lessons for how to make a good investment as a venture capitalist, right? I think that's something our listeners would
Yeah.
definitely love to hear. Like, what are some of the things that you look out for when you're deciding when to back a company? What is the stuff that excites you the most?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think there's a handful of things, um, and they kind of fall into sort of four categories. The first one's the team. Like, who's the team? Do you believe in the vision they're trying to paint? Um, do they have? Do you kind of trust them to want to give them literally millions of dollars of money? And do you think they can execute on the vision? And so that's sort of the first part of that. And no team is ever complete when you meet them. There's always, they're people. So, what makes them tick? Can they scale? Have they done what you're asking them to do before? Um, do they have a sense of how to do what it is they're trying to do? Um, and then it's then the market, and which market are they in? And for my sins, I really like the cybersecurity market, which is a huge, vibrant market,
Hmm.
with lots of opportunity. And so, in that context, it's kind of like, what's their sort of unique view on that, and why are they different to the other thousands of cybersecurity startups that are in the market today?
Hmm.
And what gives them, are they solving a big problem, or are they solving for a feature in
Yeah.
cybersecurity?
Hmm.
Um, And then where we invest, most of our companies have a product, like 99% of them have a product. So let's learn about the product and what does it do and how does it work and what problem does it solve. And it kind of, all those things tie together. And then the fourth part is sort of the financial results and what are the trailing sort of metrics of all the work that goes on.
Hmm.
And so those four ingredients mixed together are kind of what make the basis of what I think is a good investment. And and the financial element is also then, from an investment point of view, the valuation. Like, we've seen years of now of very, very high valuations. So for us to do our job and return money to our partners, we need to believe we can invest at this price, help build the company and support the entrepreneur to build the company, and then sell our shares at a price that delivers a great result for our partners.
Who do you
So that's
rely on? Who do you rely on to determine evaluation? I'm sure I'm asking a naive question,
no, no, no.
but like,
We
yeah.
we do all the pricing inside. So as a team, we do it. We build a model, a financial model or a business model for the company. We look at as many precedent sort of transactions as we can, be it venture investments or M&A. We look at the public market comparables, and then you're in a competitive process. So at what price do you really want to buy into the company that still supports your belief of the sort of return you're going to make and need to make. And at some point, the price is too high, then you don't invest. And at other points, you have enough conviction that you'll pay a really high price and hope the company can kind of build to that. I think as a fund, we're pretty conservative, and I think very rational in terms of pricing. Um, so I think we sort of have a good, stable sort of base to how we think about pricing. And then when you pitch to the other partners on the investment, you get all the hard questions in terms of the assumptions you've made and the price you've picked and what does it really mean.
So even though you, as a partner, may believe it, you still have to sell it internally to get everybody to buy into it, and then you have to get an LP to back it, right?
Well, we have a fund, so the LPs have already agreed to give us money, and they trust us to invest sensibly and return capital to them. So we don't have to ask them for new money. We just have to convince ourselves of the merits of the investment.
So the LPs have already said, we're going to trust Telstra or Marcus and his team to make these decisions, and we're going to contribute to the fund, and then from there you can make your decisions on your own.
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's really helpful.
Exactly.
I have so many questions about that, but
Far away.
Yeah, well, so I suppose on the pricing question, right? Like when you're an investor, who ends up? Is it a negotiation with the company itself for how much you'll put in, or how do those negotiations work?
It's very part of it is kind of art, part science. Like, so we do this work, we build a model, we have a view on price, but then we're in a competitive market, and so other funds are doing the same thing. And sometimes we partner with those funds and we agree a price and try and win the business together. Or, we're competing to win an investment. And so then it becomes a negotiation between the founder and us, and the founder and the other sort of suitors, if you like, for that investment. And then part of that is price, and part of it is then what all the other things that we can add as a fund to the company. So it's a beauty contest. That's a terrible way to say it. That's what it feels like. And in an environment where there's lots of money looking for investments, prices go up. When the environment changes and, it's your prices fall or there's less money, then prices will come down. Because our job is to pay as little as possible, and the founder's job is to get a reasonable price. But, the market kind of speaks for itself.
Well, that's really interesting. That's something that I literally know nothing about. So I appreciate you walking me and viewers and listeners through it. That's really interesting. Now, on the product side, you said 99% of the time they have a product. Now, of course, we're all familiar with like the terrible stories that are being circulated in the global media these days about companies that didn't have a real product that then got all sorts of money. But I also imagine that there's, the definition of a product can be anything. It can be in prototype phase, it can be in beta, it can be quite mature already and you're investing later. How much product is enough?
Now there's a tricky question. So the way we proxy for that is, do you have customers that are paying you to use the product? And generally, this is like a gross rule of thumb. It's, sometimes they have 5 customers, sometimes the company will have 10 or 15 customers. And it's a little bit of a judgment call as to how much product is enough. And the reality is, at that stage of a company's life, they have built the bones of the product, they've worked with a bunch of design partners and customers who are helping them build the product, and then they're starting to sell it. So we're really interested in, for where we invest, what are the signals we see in that sales motion, and what do we see in response to when we talk to the customers about the problem that they're solving, and can we kind of extrapolate that? to somewhere else. And then, the job the company has and we have after we've invested is to kind of find them people, support them with capital, find them customers, do the work that we do to help them scale their business to the next level.
That's really cool. Now, having never founded anything, my background's in like national security policy. I worry about the people who are like, I don't worry about them. I don't understand what their life is like when they have like the bare bones idea. They want to build something. Now, if they've done this before, then they know previous investors, or maybe they made a lot of money, and so they have the capital to themselves invest in their product.
Yeah.
But what about for people that are just like, I want to build this app today? Is that
Yeah.
when like angel investors come in? Are those the people for them to call? Are they supposed to find angel investors to help them
Yeah,
get their first customer?
I mean, there's a sort of a most people who have have an idea and understand a problem that they want to solve. The first kind of money they try to find is folks that they know, or they use their own money, or maybe they did have a successful exit before and they can kind of bootstrap it. But all of those first checks, whether it's an institutional fund or it's their own money or their friends and family, are sort of those angel and sort of seed or pre-seed investors. Then as they start to write code and create a product, they'll hit milestones that then attract the next level of investor or a seed investor, and so on and so forth. So as the company grows and the product matures and they find design partners and customers, there's different levels of appetite for investment. So if you're an angel investor or a seed investor, you're writing smaller checks, $10, $25, $50,000 checks. But there's a really high risk that you won't get your money back. But if the company grows and scales, that small investment can become very, very valuable. We have less appetite for failure, so we invest a little bit later in the company's growth profile. So we invest at that sort of Series A and Series B, where they have customers and they have a product and they're generating revenue. So the risk of them failing is still high, but it's not as high as when they're first sitting around a card table in a restaurant and drawing out the design on a paper napkin.
This is really instructive and cool. I didn't know we were going to talk about this. I realized that I've had these questions knocking around my head for months, if not years, as I've thought about startups. I've interacted with investors before, and I think probably I've been too ashamed to ask some of these questions. And I also wanted to give this for other people like me who are out there listening who think, what does it actually mean to be a venture capitalist? Like, how do you do this? Like, what are you looking for? So I appreciate you walking us through that.
Happy to share.
Yeah. So
really happy to share.
Have you had moments where like you've met like a small team and you've thought, this team is so good, I believe in them so much. I think the rest of their business plan is kind of crap. They don't have anything to go on, but I believe in them so much. I just want to give them like a positive endorsement and tell them to come back in X and Y months. Or maybe that happens more at the seed stage.
Always. Like,
Really?
yeah, there's loads of people that are like technically and commercially brilliant, creating new companies and thinking up new and solving new ideas. And I love to meet those people at that stage because we're great investors. We want to invest when we know these people, because like I said, team is a big part of this. And team is people, so you got to get to know the people. And while they're forming their idea, if we really love the idea and they don't quite fit our financial profile, what can we do to help them kind of succeed with the idea? And maybe that gives us a preferential right to invest because they know us and they like us. And then you're working together for the next 5 to 10 years, which is weekly, monthly, quarterly, daily phone calls and conversations. So you spend a lot of time together.
I mean, that must be some of the most exciting parts of the job, to just be out there sensing ideas, sensing technologies, meeting people, interacting with the community, and like and then getting the chance to build partnerships with people you really like.
Totally. It's also the most frustrating because sometimes you don't win the date. You don't get married, and you see these guys go and build these amazing companies, and you kind of miss the opportunity. But yeah, it is. It's the best. It's not it's just one of the parts of the job, and it's actually really fun. I actually really like the part after you invest and you kind of help these companies build their businesses. The most fun is when they're super successful and everyone, makes money and everyone goes on to build a bigger business. And you've done years and years of hard work to get there. That's really rewarding.
Yeah, of course. To see from the
Yeah.
idea to the exit,
Yeah.
which is a good opportunity for us to pivot to I think the next line of questions that I wanted to ask you about, which is,
Yeah.
what do you see in cybersecurity and security overall these days that excites you? What are some of the trends where you say, I want to learn more about that and I want to meet people doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, totally. I think cybersecurity is one of these really interesting industries that kind of builds on shifts in tech changes and tech
Mm-hmm.
trends. Um, so, and it builds on changes in how criminals behave and the techniques they use to commit crime. Because cybersecurity is preventing crime, and so we spend a lot of time thinking about the changes in how technology and technology infrastructure and architecture is changing, and that's an ongoing kind of process. And we're literally sitting and talking about what do we think the next shift in IT architecture is going to be, and then I think out of that then spawns where do the next really big cybersecurity companies come from. And like here and now today, I think there's a bunch of really interesting problems around data security. I think there's interesting problems around identity, and identity is still, a big topic of conversation. It's not solved. Um, I think organizations are moving, and there's already really successful companies in some of these spaces, like still going through this digitization of their applications and user experience, and that's creating opportunities for kind of cloud security companies. I think the emergence, well not the emergence, but the crypto world is just rife with opportunity for security companies.
Mm-hmm.
Like it
Yeah.
seems to be so easy to commit fraud there that there just seems to be lots and lots of opportunity there.
Yeah.
So we're spending some time there. Whether we
Yeah.
invest there is a question, but we're spending time there.
That's a good one. I mean, I think it's worth clarifying because when you say crypto, I think of
Hmm.
like the crypto mining people that hit me up on Twitter and Instagram pretending to want to be friends, and then like 10 text messages in, and I always know they're going to do it, which is why I talk to them. They're like, hey, have you thought about Bitcoin investment? Have you bought Bitcoin? But you're not talking about that part of crypto, are you?
No, it's more the infrastructure and the building blocks of this industry. And um, I'm still very much a new student to that industry, so I'm gonna extend a political license to myself to talk about it. But um, the
I hereby grant you a license, so you're not the only one doing it. You have a
yeah,
license.
good job, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, you
But
bet.
it's like there's still so many building blocks that are being created in that industry, and there's still these sort of tectonic shifts that are occurring um, as people try and figure out how to create companies, create infrastructure, and really kind of build the pieces of the puzzle um, in that market. And then at the top of that, you have um, people who have crypto projects. I mean, the fraud thing is really interesting because it sort of goes back to KYC and know your customer and know your client. It goes to a level of trust and a level of there's transparency in what people are trying to achieve, and there's stories every day about people that put money into a project. The project founders get the money and then they disappear. Like it's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
Um, and then you have like there's a very successful company. We're not invested in
But
it
you're
for the
talking
same.
about people investing in a project and then them disappearing as like in conducting a criminal act, basically.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah,
Huh.
totally.
What's KYC? I'm not familiar with that.
It's
Kentucky
like
City.
when
Yeah.
you, yeah, Kentucky City. It's like know your customer. So when you open a bank account, you have to rock up and provide a bunch of data around who you are, and the
Hmm.
bank validates that, and you get to open an account. Like that's a very basic sort of function that is absent in a lot of the kind of blockchain industry. But there's companies solving for it, and there's things that are going on to solve for it. And how do you manage identity? Identity is a really interesting problem to solve for in the blockchain and crypto market. Um, so, it's a fascinating space, and one we're going to spend more time on.
Cool. Well, folks, take it as a note. Learn more about the blockchain and crypto space. I mean, it's been on my radar for a while. I feel like I need to read like at least 3 Economist articles about it or Financial Times articles about it. It's like I know people that have made a lot of money at it, but it's. I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about it,
Yeah,
Marcus, because
go
that
find
makes
some
me.
go find some people who are deep into it and go and talk to them. It's a better way to do it.
Yeah, totally. Well, maybe we could do that as one of our next conversations.
All right.
Is do a dive into blockchain. What are some of the other areas of particular interest in cyber these days, outside of blockchain? Which, I mean, it sounds really cool.
Yeah. So, spending a lot of time looking at companies that are helping enterprises predict um, threats that are coming.
Hmm. I
So
know a company that does something like that. Yeah.
a little bit like that, but it's more like as criminals set up effectively a project to commit ransomware, they
Hmm.
build a bunch of infrastructure. And there's companies that are seeing all the early signals of that infrastructure being created,
Huh.
and they can tell that to customers, and that's sort of important information for enterprises. And then that allows them to put defenses in place ahead of an attack. So it's sort of preemptive type work. Um, like I say, I still think identity, there's lots of things to solve around identity. We've sort of
Hmm.
recently invested in a company called Strata Identity, which is solving some really interesting problems in that market, but I do think there's more to do there.
Hmm.
Um,
You're talking like beyond like two-factor authentication for validating
yeah,
identity. Yep.
totally.
Hmm.
When you peel back the onion of an enterprise, the
Hmm.
identity infrastructure is very, very complex. And generally, they have multiple generations of technology doing something in identity related to products or employees or customers. And if you the digitization of these organizations is moving these applications into the cloud, and a roadblock to that is identity. And how do you migrate these old identity architectures into these new modern environments?
Hmm.
And it's a little bit of a sales pitch, so but Strata helps kind of solve that as a first problem,
Hmm.
um, and abstracts away all of that complexity. Um,
Cool.
Equally, we were investors in Auth0 back in the day, which is like a really sort of foundational identity company in the relationship between an enterprise and its consumer base or customer base. It's simplifying that environment. But there's lots and lots of complexity, and there's lots of problems to be solved in that part of the industry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we're also interested in. Well, I am also interested in data security. How do you secure your data um, as a corporation? If identity is now the new front door, data is kind of the crown jewels, um, and security around data is really hard to
Hmm.
do, but it's really important. So there's a bunch of early stage companies that are having another go at solving security around data in particular.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on zero trust? If you have any strong opinions, I'd love to hear them.
I think it's the right. I think it's really hard to implement architecturally, but I think conceptually it's the right way to think about how you build security, which is you kind of don't you have to validate to get access. You don't trust anybody. Um, so I think that makes conceptually really good sense. It's then how do you implement that in your organization, which is really tough. The other thing I would say in security, like there's like really basic operational challenges that are still to be solved. You talk to any number of CISOs and they're wrestling with basic problems like patching and like the block and tackling of their industry and keeping talent and you know like application coding and improving security and the actual core of an application being written. I think all these are other areas that are really fascinating, and you still good companies to be built there.
As somebody who came to the technology sector from the national security community, and now this is my coming up on my fourth year in working in technology, so I'm like still relatively new to it.
Mm.
Um, there's a part of me that says like, look, there are cybersecurity solutions out there that I know work pretty well, and I see a breach, and I'm like, well, if only they'd had that solution, which they
Yeah,
don't, they'd be in a much better position, right? But then, like what you're actually saying, on the other hand, is um, the internet and the way the technology grows introduces consistent operational problems, some of which simply haven't been
yeah,
solved, right? Like
yep,
there are some great solutions that are out there, but then there's others that are just like this problem won't go away.
yep.
Like the sheer scope of vulnerability management, like what to do and how to solve it. I imagine I haven't seen a good solution for how to like automatically prioritize and patch. I haven't seen something that would do that.
No, no, exactly. And it's not going away. It's only getting harder and more complex and more broad, and new technology and changes to architecture just add to the complexity of it.
Yeah,
And part of it is you've got people in the middle of this as well, and people are people. They make mistakes. Stuff isn't done. Stuff's not configured. Manual processes don't work. And there's just an endless opportunity for errors to be identified and fixed, and tools to help solve for them.
yep. The one that I would love to talk more about sometime with you. We're running out of time, but this idea of sensing when criminals are building ransomware infrastructure,
Hmm.
seems like really, really, really cool. Like if you could interpret it through behaviors on the internet, and then
Yeah.
being like, this is the shape of this amorphous thing that's soon going to become very clear.
Yep.
It sounds like you have a particular company in mind that does that, but that seems really neat. I don't know how much more you can talk about it.
Yeah. There's a few companies that are coming at the same problem in different ways, but it's literally what it is. It's like, what are the building blocks when you're going to launch an attack? And can you identify the marshalling of those resources so in such a way that you can get enough signal that you can tell a customer that there's a potential issue? And the further you can get in front of that, and the um, more accurate, if you can deliver that signal more accurately, then the value to the customer is really high.
That's very. I mean,
Yeah.
the analogy is like we're watching troop movements in Europe in advance of an invasion, and we know the troops are going to happen. Like it's here, it's there,
Totally.
and then or whatever it may be. Like, and this is why the Russians and the United States hid their nuclear missiles on submarines, right? Like hide them so you can't see them,
You can't
or
see
you
them,
have
you
them
don't know what
curved.
to do.
Say
Yep.
again.
Yeah, if you can't see them, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
It's a surprise. So it just takes out the element of surprise.
I love that. I love the idea of being able to see ransomware attacks
Hmm.
forming through the resource-based analysis. I'd love to learn more about it.
Yeah.
Um, I should ask because you're one of our investors. What was it that attracted you to breach and attack simulation? Obviously, you're
Yeah.
not going to say anything extraordinary that's not extraordinary. So go ahead.
Pressure's on.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. But I was curious, like
Yeah,
what were some of the tips in your head that thought, you know what, this is really neat. I want to invest in this.
yeah, totally. So I'll go back to the things we talked about. So the team, we met the team, and I really loved the founders,
Hmm.
and thought the vision of what they're trying to do was really interesting. And in terms of the kind of the product and the market opportunity blended together, if you like, we'd invested in a bunch of what I call, cybersecurity kind of tools at this point, who are trying to find bad guys, detect threats, provide intelligence, whatever it's going to be. But all Attack IQ are coming at the cybersecurity market like totally orthogonal to that, and saying, you've got all these tools. How do you improve the efficacy of everything you've already purchased? How do
Hmm.
you validate, um, you, when you put these tools in, that they're still doing the same job you need them to do, like one day, 1 week, 6 months, 1 year later?
Hmm.
And you know, and so I think that was a really unique sort of point of view, um, to be able to test for that, and then give that to a customer and say, here's all the weaknesses in your defenses. Go and do these three things, and you will solve some of these problems. And do it from the point of view of an attacker and them trying to hack into your system. I think is, it's just, there's a concept in sort of engineering of a control system, and I think in fullness the vision for this is the control system identifies when the control goes out of, limit, sends an alert, the engineer goes and adjusts the control, and it happens in, somewhat real time. And that sort of idea doesn't exist in security today. And if you can build that, that's a really big and important and interesting company in that market.
Yeah.
Because there's no CISO I've met yet who has a system that gives them that level of, um, efficacy on their security controls.
Yeah.
So that was the vision, which I love. Love the team. Love the team today. Um, I think the vision is still super valid, and the market is enormous.
Yep. And yep, exactly. I remember when I first met Attack IQ, the idea was it was completely different from all the other companies that I'd looked at before, which
Yeah,
was really important to me, having been doing cybersecurity for now forever, 12 years, right, off and on. I wanted something totally different that solved a real problem, and it's really heartening to hear what you said, because that's the same kind of vision that I had for why I joined. And then the team was really
yeah,
it. Like right off the bat, I trusted my bosses.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
that's super
Super,
heartening
super
to
cool.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah, great team. Really mission driven. Kind of very focused on the outcome and focused on the vision, which is outstanding.
Yeah. Um, well, Marcus, it's been such a pleasure having you today. I think for anyone listening, for particularly for potential founders, you can get a feel for Marcus Bartram here. He's like diligent, trustworthy, hardworking, and like obviously puts his heart into it. So we're very lucky to have you as an investor and a partner. I've learned a lot from our two conversations, and I'm looking forward to more. Um, but thank you very much for coming on today. I think this will be really helpful for anyone, particularly interested in learning about what it means to be a venture capitalist working in the cybersecurity industry. I'm sure they'll find this really interesting. Do you have any parting thoughts before we depart?
Uh, Jonathan, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Um, my only parting thought: we're happy to talk to anyone about who's founding a company, and wants to talk to someone who might be interested in investing downstream. But yeah, really love the chat, and really nice
Great.
to meet you and talk to you.
Yeah, and so you can find Marcus on LinkedIn, or you can look up Telstra Ventures and find his bio on the website. We'll put those in the show notes for listeners out there. And thanks again for tuning in, Marcus. One thing we may ask you next time, because I asked Rob Hornbuckle this last time, which is who his heroes are, and I think for next time I'm going to ask you that question too. I might have to
All right, you're
rub
on.
that in.
Oh, I'm on notice. Sounds good.
All right, be well, everybody. Thanks again.